Good evening, and we will call the West Ada School Board meeting in order. First item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Everybody will stand with us. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you and welcome this evening. I always think it's kind of nice to recognize a few people in the room, especially when we've got some newly elected trustees in the room. So Ms. Angie Redford and Ms. Lori Frazier, would you guys stand up and let the folks see you? These are our trustees that'll be joining us in January. And with that, Dr. Bubb, it's up to you.
Madam Chair, trustees, thank you so much. It's been an eventful couple of weeks here for West Ada School District. I want to start again by acknowledging Angie Redford and Lori Frazier and thanking them for their upcoming service. This is obviously is a challenging time, but we appreciate you stepping up and offering your service to West Ada School District. I also want to say a thank you to our community for their support of the supplemental levy. That really allows us to continue to operate at the level that we are, offering continual education opportunities for all of our kids. A little bit on the educational side, Marcus is really going to get into it in a little bit with teaching and learning, so I'm not going to dig in too far, but some really exciting things from teaching and learning that we see going on in our classrooms. I've had the opportunity to hit classrooms a lot in the last couple of weeks, and I'm just so thankful for our teachers and what they're doing in the classroom every single day. This was National Psychologist Week. National School Psychologist Week, sorry. And we're going to honor them a little bit tonight, and we'll kind of get a glimpse into what their days look like, but they're a huge part of what we do. And then as we head into, this is American Educator Week, and so I just want to take a moment to really intentionally recognize what our educators do every single day. They are the unsung heroes oftentimes of our school district. They make a difference every single day in the classroom. I think back to my days as a student, and I can specifically remember some teachers that influenced me, that pushed me along, probably had to push me a lot harder than I should have needed to be pushed, but I'm so thankful for them, and I'm thankful for the people we have here in West Ada. Just passing over Veterans Day, I think that I need to recognize. We have so many employees, both past and present, that either currently serve in the military or have served in the military, and I want to really be intentional about thanking them for their service, thanking them for everything that they've given up. We were able to participate in a Heroes Walk at Eagle High School this past Friday. It was amazing. There are so many heroes within our community. I think obviously this pandemic has shed light on the heroes that we have in our community, but there are so many people that make us function every single day, so a special thank you to them. And then upcoming, we're going to start with some stakeholder meetings. I've scheduled some meetings with some groups of parents, some teachers, individual meetings, or individual group meetings, I should say, where we can really get a pulse on where we're at as a district and what our different needs are from area to area. So that will happen not just that first week in December. We have a set amount of meetings, but then we'll continue those kind of quarterly where I can sit down and work through some of the challenges that we have as a district and some of our wins that we know we continue to have. I'll go over COVID numbers really quickly because it's tradition here. COVID school numbers, vaccinations obviously are available, ages 5 to 11. That became available in early November. As of for the week of 11/7, that would be last week, we had 16 cases reported, which gives us an average of 5.34 cases per 100,000. The week of 10/31, which would have been the week before that, 52 cases. 10/24, the week before that, 59 cases, and 10/17, 63 cases. That's really for our school specific. I'll give the one little asterisk there, if you will. The 16 cases, we report on the week, much like CDH does, we report on the week that they were contagious, and so that number could include, if a kid comes back and says, hey, I was contagious last week, we would put it with last week's number, so that number could grow a little bit. COVID community numbers, we're currently set at about 6.9% testing positivity. St. Al's, from our hospital standpoint, sits at 35 active cases in the Treasure Valley. St. Luke's sits at 67 active cases. And they just, in a matter of celebration, they just closed their last surge unit this last week. We currently sit in the Treasure Valley at 72% vaccination rate, ages 12 and up. That does not include our newly eligible kids that are available for that vaccination. So that kind of sums up where we're at from a COVID standpoint and a school district standpoint, and I'll open it up for any questions.
Thank you. Is there any questions from the board? Trustee Kofelt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Bubb, thank you for the numbers. I'm curious, and I don't know if you've had any conversations with St. Al's or St. Luke's, but as I see those numbers, I might be off, but those numbers seem like they might even be lower than when they went into crisis care. So have they indicated any time when they plan on coming out of that?
Madam Chair, Trustee Kofelt, I have not gotten a strong sense of when they plan to come out of that. I know that one of the pieces they're looking at is making sure that that they're not going to go back into some type of standard crisis care, and remember they're still taking patients from all over the state into regional hospitals, and so I think working through that is an important piece.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you. Dr. Bubb, I was going to ask a similar question that Trustee Kofelt asked on those active cases numbers. Are those ICU cases or are those total cases in the hospital? What's the qualifier on those?
Madam Chair, yeah, those are total cases. Now, the only thing that doesn't include is people that have recovered and are currently going through recovery treatment, recovered from COVID, but are hospitalized based on the severity of the sickness. So, but those are active cases within the hospitals.
Thank you. All right. Well, one of our favorite parts of the agenda is the West Ada Spotlight. So we'll turn that over to you. All right, thank you.
Madam Chair, thank you. Madam Chair, trustees, at this time I'd like to ask Sierra Nielsen and Harun Topolovic to come to the podium. And I might have butchered both of those names. Did I do good? I'm going to read a real quick statement on both of them. Harun and Sierra were both winners of the Idaho Council for Exceptional Children 2021 Yes, I Can Awards. Harun attends Lowell Scott Middle School as a 6th grader. Harun struggled with his behavior a little bit, but he was able to tell his teachers that he wanted more independence. Now he attends most of his classes without any support. He is a peer tutor and a lunch server, 2 jobs he's exceptionally proud of. Sierra attends Mountain View High School and wants to become an author when she graduates from high school. In middle school, Sierra had to use a scribe, but what she wanted more than anything was to become an independent writer. She and her team worked hard to develop a system to help her toward this goal. It has been hard work and a lot of practice to learn how to use a switch to operate a computer so she can write unaided, but she did it. Both of these students received Yes, I Can awards from the Council of Exceptional Children in the self-advocacy category. Sierra was honored as a national recipient and will have the opportunity to travel to Florida, where she will receive her award and represent Idaho and West Ada. We are beyond proud of both of these students. Congratulations.
I might just take a little point of privilege here. I know the Nielsen family, and this is probably one of the greatest families I've ever worked with and been around, and so I really, a product as right there with the family and the children. We really appreciate all that you've done. So thank you.
Okay, on to our next spotlight. Last week was National School Psychology Week, highlighting the important work of our school psychologists in our schools. I would like to thank all of our school psychologists who proudly serve the students and families in our schools, many of whom are here tonight. Thank you for joining us. If Echo Mansfield and Teresa Fritsch could please come up. We want to take a moment to extend our sincere congratulations to school psychologist Echo Mansfield on receiving the Idaho School Psychologists Association Distinguished Service Award. Echo proudly serves the school communities at Spalding STEM, Christine Donnell, and Hillsdale Elementary. And I think she has a couple words.
I do.
Awesome.
Psychologists like to talk, right? So, Madam Chairman, Dr. Bob, members of the board, thank you so much for having us here tonight. It is an honor to be here and an honor to be honored by ISBA, the Idaho School Psychologists Association. I personally want to thank all of you for the work you do for our community. The efforts in these difficult times do not go unnoticed by those of us in the field. So I was asked to share a few words about what I do in a couple of minutes. It's a pretty tall order because, like I said, we like to talk. Many people may not be aware that school psychologists exist in all of our buildings, which is amazing. And they may believe that we're the people who come in, give an IQ test, and then leave. And that is not exactly the way it works. We do have a variety of things that we're trained to do. I did provide you guys with a handout that you guys can look at later. But we are trained to do things like database decision making, consultation, academic and behavioral interventions, mental health services, school-wide practices, school community collaboration, services to promote safe and supportive schools, assisting with equitable provision of services for diverse populations, evidence-based practices, and issues surrounding legal and ethical issues with the provision of school psychology and special education services. That's all a bunch of fancy words that says we work on behalf of students and staff to break down the barriers to learning and providing services that help improve learning outcomes for students. And I do it with a joyful heart. I feel that I have the best job in the world, and I'm proud to do it here at West Ada. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Echo. Now, we also wanted to take the time to congratulate Hawaii High School's school psychologist, Teresa Fritsch, who was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Idaho School Psychologists Association. We are so lucky to have you as part of Hawaii High School community and West Ada School District. On a personal note, I was lucky enough to be able to work with Teresa for a couple years over at Mountain View, and you do an amazing job, so thank you. And then we'll give you a little time to kind of talk through.
Well, I don't want to say echo, so I'll try to divert a little bit of what she said. But Madam Chair, trustees, and Dr. Bob, thank you so much for this honor and this recognition tonight that you've been able to provide me. And I do enjoy, and I also work at Sawtooth Middle School in the Deaf and Hard of Hearing program, so I do want to kind of bring them into my equation. But I also want to thank you, Dr. Bob. I appreciate you recognizing National School Psychology Week and what we did, and traveling around to each and every one of us this past week and providing us a gift and a word of encouragement and bringing visibility to our profession. So thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I just want to put a little plug in. You have your Idaho School Board Association conference this week, and I'm hoping you'll see that there's a little presentation there that myself and a couple of colleagues put together. So if you want to learn a little bit more about what we do, check out that little presentation. It's a pre-recorded workshop. So thank you again for the honor. I appreciate it.
Thank you both, and congratulations. Now, West Ada School District is proud to host 2 deaf and hard of hearing programs in our school district, 1 at Ponderosa Elementary School and 1 at Rocky Mountain High School. Principals from both schools are here tonight. Ponderosa Elementary School Principal Casey Choate and from Ponderosa, and Principal Mike Harano from Rocky Mountain High School. We will begin with Ponderosa Elementary. Is Casey here? There she is.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Board of Trustees, and Superintendent Dr. Bubb. I am the principal at Ponderosa Elementary, and thank you for inviting us to be a spotlight with your special programs. Tonight in attendance with me, I have 2 of my teachers of the deaf. I have Holly Ames and Brittany Orr. And then I also have some parents who are parents of children in the program and their students as well. And then I also have 2 interpreters with me tonight. I have Bria Martinez and Holly Kohler. I will go ahead and turn this over to the 2 teachers of the deaf so they can talk about the program. And then if the parents and the students, I have one student who told me he might want to say something, if they would like to also present, and then we can stand for any questions. Go ahead.
Good evening, Madam Chair, and Dr. Bubb as well. I'm Brittany Orr. I'm a teacher of the deaf. With our program at Ponderosa, we have 19 kids right now. We have 7 kindergartners as well, and they are under the Idaho Educational Services for the Deaf and Blind program on our campus. And I have been working there for 6 years so far. And it is a really neat program, and it's been great to see the changes that have happened there. With our DHH program, it started small, and it's transitioned to be a more inclusive program, and it's just been amazing to watch our program. We have many staff that support us and our students. We have 7 interpreters, and we have 2 deaf language assistants or paras. And the culture at Ponderosa is amazing. We have hearing and deaf kids that mix together and socialize every day. I see them outside playing on the playground and getting along, and it's amazing to see their communication. They've taken away the communication barriers. And we are really lucky to have our DHH program. We have an opportunity where they come into the DHH room and they feel safe. They can communicate with each other in either English or sign language, either language. And it's really neat to see that in our program. We have 3 parents who might like to make some comments, and I would turn the time over to them now. And thank you so much for your time.
Good evening. My name is Stacy Trevino, and my daughter is Sonia. She's in 3rd grade. She started with this program since pre-K. As you know, parenting is not easy, especially when now you find a child that's disabled. Last year was a toll on our family. Not knowing how we're going to teach, not knowing how she was going to go on with life, because both her dad and I don't have that disability. But Ponderosa has given us a home, has given us opportunity to have our daughter progress, prepare her for the future, because they are our future. It's been a blessing, not just because she feels at home, but because she can interact with all the kids. She can be comfortable of who she is and use her sign language. She's new to it. She's learning. They're very, very on top of her education. Where she's failing, they're picking her up right there and encouraging her to continue to keep going. So it's such an amazing program. We didn't know anything about it until we had to, face the challenges ourselves. And we're learning as parents, when they tell us that she needs another form of communication, as parents, you want to do whatever you can to make sure they succeed. So I'm very grateful for this program. She's just excelled at a lot of things that I didn't think was possible, but you know, you've had some great educators. I know the pandemic has taught us that we should be grateful for all those educators, all those people that are on the front line, all those people that are there encouraging from home, from school. You know, masks are not fun, but we're trying to keep a safe environment for them, and I'm grateful for all you guys. I read all the emails, I read everything, and I'm just so grateful to participate and be able to be here and say, you know, I'm very thankful for you guys for allowing my daughter to be in this program, for the teachers that teach her, for the principal that educates them as well, you know, but I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. I think on behalf of the board, we can say we're all grateful you share your child with us. Thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Bebb, Board of Trustees. Thank you for this opportunity that we have to highlight such an amazing little gem that you have here in the West Ada District. My name is Lelania Henderson. I am the mother of 4 children. This is my youngest, Landon. He too is our 3rd grader at Ponderosa. And I just want to echo a lot of the words that Sonia's mom said. She really spoke from her heart, and I appreciate that. Landon too was born with the hearing loss that no one else in the family had, and so we were kind of thrust into this atmosphere. And we are so grateful for the continuity that the program at DHH does and who they work with there. Landon started at Ponderosa in the pre-K early intervention preschool through the ISBA program. And then when it came time for him to exit that program to enter a formal school setting, his dad and I were a little anxious and apprehensive of what that was going to look like and how that was going to work for him. Him entering the DHH, that seamless transition from ISDB to DHH at Ponderosa was such a blessing to us, and we are so grateful for Mrs. Orr, Miss Brittany, and the paras, the interpreters that are there. They really do care for these students. They pick them up. They meet them where they're at. I will say for Landon, that crazy spring of 2020 when everything stopped, any learning loss that he had was very quickly picked up that following school year in 2nd grade. And his father and I put a lot of that on Brittany and her program and what they do there. They're not afraid to step in and help these kids. Landon's a visual learner. They know that. They know how to teach him with his hearing loss. You know, certain words can be misinterpreted, and there can be lots of confusion in the classroom. This is where the DHH program steps in and helps him and continues his education, and we are just so grateful for that. We're grateful for the opportunity that he has in the program to have access to ASL, to have access to the deaf culture. He has friends that are deaf, he has friends that are hearing, he has friends that are hard of hearing, and that seamless transition that you've heard about from both Miss Brittany and Sonia's mom it's true, it's there. These kids interact, they are friends with one another, and it's an environment of love and learning and acceptance, and we appreciate everyone at Ponderosa and their DHH program there. Thank you. You want to say something? Okay. Can Landon say something? Okay.
So my name is Landon, and I just wanted to hear a couple questions.
You want some questions from us?
Yes.
Okay. I know Trustee Kofelt has one.
Hi, Landon. I can't see you because you're hiding behind the screen. Hi, buddy. What is your favorite sport?
My favorite sport is baseball.
Thank you. I love that sport too. Thank you.
Thank
Trustee,
you.
good job, Landon. Trustee Kloppenstein?
Yes, I know over at Ponderosa that they have a little running program. Do you run?
Not really. Not really because I have asthma and I don't really like running, but when I have to run, I run.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I don't like running either, but thank you.
That's great. Landon, do you want one more, or are you good, buddy?
I want one more.
Okay. Trustee Buffy?
Thank you. Landon, what's your favorite school subject?
My favorite school subject is art and ELA.
Very cool. Landon, we hope that you share some art with us, some of your art.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Janelle McDonald. I have 3 kids in the West Idaho School District. My youngest, Saren, is over there coloring. She is in she's in the Deaf and Hard of Hearing program at Ponderosa. And we moved here when Saren was in kindergarten, so she did her first year with the supplemental program in ISBA. And then, as the other parents have stated, it was a seamless transition into the DHH program at Ponderosa. I wanted to talk a little bit more about just the community at Ponderosa, between the interpreters and the paras and the teachers. I feel like they are so committed to their jobs. They also have lots of deaf people that are employed in the district because of this, and I think that's important to note as well. The level of support and community that they give not only our children but each other is just amazing. They work very closely with the school psychologists and the occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech therapists. Anything our kids need, they are there to make sure that it happens. My daughter, Saren, has deaf friends. She has hearing friends. And I will say, whenever I see the kids out there playing, I just imagine how many upcoming interpreters we have with her gen ed classroom, because they're watching the interpreters and learning. Saren has a little friend in her class this year that says that Saren is her sign language teacher. So I'm just always looking like, which one is it going to be? Who's going to grow up to be those interpreters for our kids? So I think that the program is just so important for not only our kids, but for the general ed population as well. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. And I don't know about the rest of the board, but it's super great to see your kids. So really thank you for bringing them and sharing them with us. We really appreciate it. So it's good to see them thriving in our school system. So thank you. Dr. Bubb.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I just am excited that we have so many celebrations tonight. So I appreciate you guys being here, everybody being here. This is going to be our last one, but it's incredibly important. One of the things that I love about the Treasure Valley and specifically West Idaho School District is the community that we live within. Our community is unbelievably supportive. They continue to amaze me in everything that they do. So we'd like to take a moment to highlight and celebrate some of our community members. And I'm going to mess up these names. So if Ken Ogwin, Aaron James, and James Whipple could please come to the podium. Which one is Ken? How bad did I mess up that name?
It's Ogwin.
Ogwin, okay, I'll get there. Okay, on October 6th, one of our Cascade student transportation buses was involved in an accident. The bus struck a tree near Ustick and 10 Mile Roads in Meridian and as a result of a medical emergency. We're happy to report that the bus driver has recovered and is in good health. Thankfully, the students on the bus at the time of the incident were not injured. However, several of the students were understandably upset and scared. Fortunately for the bus driver and the students involved, several fast responding bystanders came to their assistance. Tonight, we'd like to honor these community heroes. Ken O'Gwyn, I did it, was the first to enter the bus and help the bus driver until first responders arrived. Erin James and her son, Renaissance student James Whipple, helped evacuate students out of the back of the bus and offered up a phone so that they could call their parents. There were other bystanders as well who we would like to thank, including the first responders who assisted in the reuniting students with their parents and providing a sense of security to the children while they waited. We thank these Good Samaritans for their heroism and bravery. We are forever grateful for you and thankful for you making our community a better place. Thank you.
Figure we just let everybody get shifted around. So. All right. So the next item up on our agenda is the 2022 proposed ISBA resolutions. And I want to walk through kind of, wasn't every board member got a copy of these resolutions? These are resolutions that the Idaho School Board Association is bringing forward this week at the meeting. And West Ada has a significant number of votes when it comes to these resolutions. How this works is that every trustee's vote, every trustee has a portion of those votes. So what happens is, in the past, if every trustee was attending the conference, then we would all just place our own vote. But because not everybody is, we wanted to make sure that the number of votes West Ada has as a package represents what the full board wants. And so what we will do is the votes on these resolutions tonight will be used to cast the votes at the meeting. So if it's a 5-0 vote, 100% of the votes will go towards that resolution. If it's a split vote, then a percentage will go based on, because it actually follows the trustee vote. So we'll go through each one of these. We don't have to go through each one of these resolutions. I'm hoping every trustee read them. We don't have anybody from School Board Association to talk through them here. But if there's any questions or something we want to talk through, now would be the time to do it. If there's any concerns on them or conversations we want to have on the resolutions. If not, when we get to the actions section, what we'll do is just take them one at a time and vote on each one, and we'll use that voting record to cast the ballots this week. So with that, I'd open it up for discussion or questions or thoughts on the resolutions. Trustee Kofelt.
Madam Chair, thank you. Actually, as I read through them, I'm supportive, and I'll be casting a vote to support all of them. I think some of them may be a bit of an uphill climb with the legislative climate, but I think they all are good resolutions.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? All right. We will move on to the next agenda item then. And that's revised policy 203.3, the patron grievance policy, and this is second reading for Mr. Heller.
Madam Chair, trustees, Dr. Bubb, like you said, in front of you is the most recent update of policy 203.3, patron grievances. Our legal counsel did review the policy, provided some suggestions, and the feedback from council was that our process for handling grievances against the superintendent was sound and made sense. The Policy Review Committee, which included trustees Buffy and Kofelt, reviewed the notes from the first reading and suggestions from legal counsel and made changes which include the new section in red at the top, which outlines some basic information regarding the grievance process, as well as an order or chain of command which the grievance should follow. We also added a definition of grievances, and we added some defined timelines at each level of the process. I do think we're in a really good place with this policy right now based on the hard work of the Policy Review Committee. And at this point, I will stand for any questions or feedback for the Policy Committee to take forward.
Thank you. Would Trustee Kofelt and Trustee Buffy like to add anything? Trustee Kofelt.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. The only thing that I'll add is I agree with Deputy Superintendent Heller that the work and the feedback from this board at our last meeting and what comes before us today, I think is a good document, and I'm supportive of it, and I really don't see any other needs that are necessary from my perspective to it. Thank you.
Trustee Buffy? Oh. Trustee Kloppenstein.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just had a question about the last paragraph, and I was wondering if you wanted to be more specific about, so if the grievance is not satisfied with the results from the conversation, thus escalating, concerning the superintendent, the matter can be escalated to the Board of Trustees for the, I'm assuming it's basically saying the grievance can escalate. Did you want to be more specific on that sentence? Just to make sure it's not vague.
We can certainly add that, some clarifying language to make that more specific. Again, this is the second reading. We will bring this back December 13th for the final reading. So I can add a little bit of a clarifying language there that it's the grievant who would be escalating that and communicating that. I can certainly do that.
Trustee Ozuna.
I have one small recommended change on the first page there where it talks about the constructive criticism. I think it might be good to look at using constructive feedback there if the committee wants to take a look at that. Otherwise, I really like the way that this reads. Thank you.
Thank you.
Trustee Kloppenstein.
Thank you very much. Just have one other thing I'd like to bring up. Going back to that last paragraph. So there really is no process for that. Did you want to include a process for it, or that the board can, maybe just something simple like the board can choose to, to move this forward or dismiss? I mean, something like that. Just some sort of it's up to the board to choose a process. I mean, how would you like to use that? It just seems a little vague. And I think specificity might be helpful. Maybe you understand what your thinking was as well.
Trustee Buffy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that the thought process that went behind this paragraph was to give the board some flexibility, because the complaint against the superintendent, it could vary greatly, and it could be something that could be handled informally between board chair and board clerk. Also, it could be as extreme as the board needing the flexibility to go to an outside investigator or agency to investigate. So I think we wanted to give flexibility to the board in that regard.
Maybe this is, I like the flexibility, and the board has always been advised that one individual board member does not have any more authority than another. And so probably my one concern with the flexibility is that we could get in a situation where the board isn't acting, the board chair is. So I guess I would encourage us to look through that, and maybe, I think we want the flexibility, but I do think we want it to be a board action, not an individual board member action, if we were going to go, or for the next steps, if a complaint was escalated to the chair for review. Trustee Buffy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I may have misspoke. The flexibility, so the policy used to read that the board chair would be investigating the complaint, and we removed that because we thought that was not appropriate, or it could be better handled. And so I think that the intent of this is that the grievant would bring the matter to the attention of the board chair and to the board clerk, and then from there, then it would either be put on the agenda, determined to be put on the agenda for executive session, or something like that.
Okay. Trustee Kofelt.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, to kind of piggyback on Trustee Buffy's comments, as we worked through this, and I read this last paragraph where it talks about if the grievant is not satisfied with the results from that conversation, the matter can be escalated to the Board of Trustees, and then follows up to say the grievant should send their complaint to the clerk and the school chair, meaning that they would send it there so it can be agendized for discussion. But that's the way we read it, but sometimes, as you read through these and you're discussing them, if we miss something that needs greater clarification. But that was the intent of it, that it would come before the board.
Okay. I think I'm with Trustee Kloppenstein. Maybe we just need to add a little bit of a process piece in there to help clarify what the intent, because I think we're all on the same page, just the clarification might help us. And then, did we have we had some discussion last time around this, and maybe you can go back to the first page, like who this policy applies to. And we had some discussion around this being employees of the district versus elected officials. Did we clarify that in here, or how did we handle that?
Yes, so Madam Chair, trustees, we did strike out some of the language and made this policy it really only applies to grievances against school district employees. Had some conversation that if we wanted language somewhere about a grievance against the board as a whole or individual trustee, that might be better handled in a different policy altogether, but this policy specifically is related to grievances against district employees.
Brett, will you refresh my memory? This policy was always set up that way originally, correct? So we didn't change anything, we just made it more clear.
Yeah, and we did strike a few words that there was some words where it referred to a grievance against the board, but there's no real remedy that we could put in place on a grievance against the board, where we can put a remedy in place in terms of how we handle things against a patron grievance with an employee.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any other questions, comments, feedback? All right, thank you, Trustee Buffy and Kofelt and Mr. Heller, this is a good policy. You guys have done a lot of work. I appreciate it.
And I will also say, I know Mr. Stans is going to come up and talk about this next one. This one also went through the Policy Review Committee for the clarifications that are in front of you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, we'll move on to that then. Mr. Stans. We're going to have revised policy 502.60.
Madam Chair and trustees and Superintendent Dr. Bubb, good evening. Policy 502.60 has two additions here. I won't go in depth here. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. The first one, lines 15 through 18. The reason for this addition is just to bring our practice in line with policy, or I should say bring our policy in line with our practice. Although it's understood by administrators when Child Protective Services or law enforcement, when they are there in a school to investigate and interview a student regarding child abuse, neglect, and in the case where the guardians may be also subject to that investigation, it's understood that we may not be allowed to be a part of that, as well as we're told not to inform parents or notify at that time. But it was not stated in policy, so we just want to make sure it's in there so that there are no misunderstandings with our administrators when they are faced with these situations. And then second addition here, lines 35 through 40. Truly, this is just put there for clarity. Reasonable suspicion is mentioned in line 31, so we felt it was necessary to just add a definition, and that very same definition is included in our student handbooks and has been in our student handbooks for quite some time. So again, it's just so for consistency's sake and clarity, that's why those lines 35 through 40 are there. So I'll stand for any questions that you may have.
Is there any questions? Trustee Gofelt.
Madam Chair, thank you. The only thing, not really a question, but just a comment. This was an area, and I appreciate the addition of this, the definition of reasonable suspicion. This was a concern of mine as we start talking about searches and things of this nature. I wanted to make sure that our language was based in law to protect not only the students' rights, but also protect the district from taking action. And so I appreciate this being put in here because I believe that it truly outlines where the court has fallen on this. So that's all. Just I appreciate that.
Thank you. Appreciate your due diligence there. Thank you. One quick question. Do we have a legal review of this policy too, or have we had a legal review since the changes have been added?
Madam Chair, no, this did not go through legal review for this policy.
Okay. Would you guys just mind having that check because it has that search and piece of it? I would like to have that feedback before we get to the second reading, if you don't mind.
Not at all. We'll do that.
Any other questions or? All right. Great. Thank you, Mr. Stans. Mr. Gillen, revised policy 1003.2.
Chair, trustees, Dr. Bubb. The main reason for these changes are really just a change in process that we'd like to go through. So currently, when individuals rent space from the district, we have to actually calculate the specific actual dollar amount and then charge the renter for that. That process is very time and labor intensive. It often takes a lot of time, so we're billing people who rent also later, so it takes time for us to bill them, and then it obviously takes time for us to calculate all of that. After some discussions I had with legal counsel, we basically came to the calculation of an average where we evaluated what our current costs over the previous 6 months. We would like to then attach that and put it into a rental agreement, and that would be part of the rental agreement that the renter would see, so they would know that cost coming up front. And then we'll continue to evaluate that average at least every 6 months to go back and take a look at it and make sure that it's fair and equitable and that we're not generating outside of our costs. So what you can see really from the changes are really we just tried to pull out some exact dollar amounts and basically reference down below in the document where we're going to change our process and essentially identify that it'll be an average that'll be identified in the rental agreement itself. This is really step one for us. This one really, it would be nice if we can start making these changes, obviously with the second reading or next reading we can finalize it, but as soon as we can. And then we're still evaluating our rental practice. We're going to change some other processes. So this will come back before you again in the next couple of months as we kind of evaluate process and look at our costs and what it is we're charging and how it is we do that with the rental agreement as we switch our software mediums as well to do our rentals. And with that, I can stand for any questions.
Thank you. Is there any questions? I'd say we aren't getting market rates on the for-profit side. I'm just saying.
We'll be working on that as well. Thank you.
So, I understand on the other ones, but some of those are pretty low. So, also, I think just one feedback, and you and I have talked about it, but just to share with fellow board members, the rates being set in policy is kind of an interesting structure. And so I think where I heard Jonathan say he was kind of going is, for now, we're kind of leaving it the way it is, but being able to publish rates and just update them with a approval through the consent agenda makes a lot more sense over time than having to change policy every time, because market rates do shift up and down, and usage, and if you actually get some pretty good usage, you might start calendaring and having other kind of things. So just seemed like it might be good to get a system set up in this that has the policy around how we manage rentals, and then the rate structure as some sort of approval annually. So.
Chair and trustees, that will be the plan going forward as we implement the new software. And just part of the software change as well is they'll do an evaluation of our current rates in comparison with our peers and just across the region. So we'll get a good picture and exposure of how it is, what we're charging, so that we can kind of gather that information and make sure that we're both comparable and providing a good service for our patrons.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Marcus, Mr. Myers, the double M. Looking forward to hearing from you. I mean, not that we didn't look forward to hearing from the other guys, too.
Well, that's okay. I get it. First of all, Chairwoman Johnson, trustees, Superintendent Dr. Bubb, thank you for the opportunity to talk about teaching and learning this evening. I do appreciate that. I want to express the gratitude I have for the opportunity to work with a board who wants to continue that focus on teaching and learning at all times, despite the operational challenges in front of us, despite the challenges that you volunteer your time to address each and every day, but definitely taking a look at what are we doing within the realm of teaching and learning, knowing that that is our primary focus and our primary goal. So I do want to express that appreciation. The other piece that I would like to express is the appreciation for the teachers and administrators who are going through this process right now. It takes a tremendous amount of courage to basically hold up a mirror in front of our practices each and every day. And teaching it is the business of teaching and learning. And at the end of the day, we have a moral and ethical responsibility to make sure our students leave us prepared and ready for career and college readiness as they step out with us in year 13. And I think that to hold a mirror up through that process and to constantly reflect on what are our current challenges instructionally within a classroom, that is a very personal reflection. And it's a personal business because we are in the people business. And as a result of that, you build relationships with students, staff, and with other team members. And to hold that mirror up isn't an easy thing to do. And so I want to recognize that as we move through this process, knowing that it is a mindset process in regards to how we feel about teaching and learning, about how we evidence our practices each and every single day, knowing that there's two sides to that story. And so just want to make sure that we highlight some of those pieces and say how much we very much appreciate the good people that are our people in the classroom with students each and every day, our teachers and administrators, and our staff who are definitely focused on the work of teaching and learning. So when we talk about one second. All right, so let's talk data and our instructional response. The first of all, our systemic benchmarking assessment calendar is about a data dip for our system on a regular basis. Taking that data dip or lifting the hood on the teaching and learning machine at the end of the school year is a reflection of the process and what's taken in place. To definitely data dip that process throughout the school year, that's what's going to have an impact on student achievement as we move through. It is formative rather than summative, and just to clarify those two vocabulary terms there, that formative means we are constantly formatively taking a look. It's an ongoing process in a shorter amount of time than that summative or summary end of year measurement of student learning towards standards. I do want you to know that this process is very intentional. It's a very intentional process by which we say at this time frame, we're going to measure student learning toward priority standards that they should have learned thus far. And that's where that mirror is being held up, essentially. And then it asks ourselves, what are we going to do as a result of that? And so by being so intentional, it's a reflection of our instructional efficacy and our planning. Instructional efficacy being, what are we doing to build the system? What are we doing to build all teachers learning and understanding of common targets. And again, what are we doing to communicate that with students? And what do we do that communicate with our patrons and families and our parents and guardians? It tells us about what our students know and don't know, but it also tells us about where learning trends need to go for the adults in the system as well. What are we doing as adults to prepare ourselves and build that professional capacity to get better at the work that we do? And so it really is about assessment, not about accountability, but assessment for learning. And that is an educational term in that there is a level of accountability knowing that at the end of the day, this is our job, to make sure that students are achieving great levels each and every single day. But there is a level to say, I'm using this to not only focus on student learning, but what are we doing as adults to drive that learning forward? Lastly, two last reminders, this isn't about the test. So this isn't about iStation through IRI or IRI through iStation or iReady. It's about math standards. It's about progress toward prioritized standards. What do we want kids to know, do, and be able to understand? And then what are we doing about it? There's a whole lot of measurement tools out there, and there were many different ones we could have chosen. What we wanted was those who have closest alignment to what's happening instructionally and what happens at the end of the year on those assessments that we are held accountable by. But at the end of the day, it really is about student learning, not the assessment itself. And that's what I'm hoping to communicate this evening to you, and what I hope to continue to communicate to you over the course of the year throughout the process of this calendar. And then lastly, just that reminder, there's a face behind those numbers. Again, kid by kid and skill by skill, that 14 percentage points in a classroom means a certain number of kids. And whether that's positive trend or negative trend of student achievement, that's something we always have to keep in mind. And our goal is to get to that kid by kid, skill by skill level. All right, so on the assessments we're going to take a look at tonight, I'm going to provide an overall summary snapshot of where we're at. And I'm going to go through grade levels, not fairly quickly, but what I want to do is look at trends. And so that's why I kept it very visual this time. And I want to just provide some clarification around the data that we pulled and their use behind that data, and then some celebrations. So what are we doing with that data? What are we celebrating from that data? And then what are we doing to move forward? So the first few slides I have before you, this is our early literacy standards. And you notice at the top, I very purposely put that rather than saying this is ISIP or IRI. Okay, that's the name of the assessment. What we're measuring in this is early literacy standards. This happens to be kindergarten. What you see, the slide on the left, which I think is still your left on that side, the slide on the left is where we're at now. So you'll notice that every month we take a formative measure, an assessment towards students' early literacy standards in kindergarten through third grade. Overall, you see that percentage that's there, that's percentage proficient. Okay, so that's where students should be at this time frame of the year. And it is an assessment that changes throughout those different standards are being measured, the level those standards are being measured as the school year goes on. Okay, so at this time, 67% of students in kindergarten are demonstrating proficiency toward early literacy standards as measured by IRI. The slide you see to the right is what it was last year. So you can see that upward trend, some of the trends that we see over time, and of course, historically, we do have this data. But this is what I mean by that formative assessment measure. We get to have this assessment every month, okay, which is such a valuable trend, and especially with early literacy, because student skills grow in that type of time frame. And so you can see the amount of ambitious growth that's taking place, not just in kindergarten, but what has happened, trend data over the course of the years. And so as compared to where we were at last year, this is very similar. The other thing I want to note, just really quickly, is that this isn't, what you see in front of you isn't cohort data. In fact, you can pull cohort data from this, but very intentionally, I didn't use cohort data in this presentation for this reason, which is what we're looking at is data that changes core instruction. And by core instruction, what I mean by that is this is first time highly effective instruction. It's what you would think if you kind of close your eyes and think what's happening in my child's classroom. Larger groups of students, teacher is directly teaching toward a priority standard. They may be areas of differentiation and intervention that are taking place in the moment, but this is the larger bulk of instruction in early literacy instruction for students. The reason I don't bring up the cohort data is because that data is used to define something different, which is intervention and enrichment. That's where learning gaps, where students have those learning gaps. Now, teachers, of course, are pulling that information, pulling that data, and designing interventions with that, especially in early literacy, because it's important to attack that sooner rather than later. But again, we're taking a look at a picture of overall, where is reading in direct core instruction? How are we doing in making sure students learn the first time through, right? Okay, so that's the trend in kindergarten, the trend in first grade, And you can see overall, as compared to previous years, we're in the same range. And that's true because core instruction within early literacy tends to fall within those timeframes. I am very much encouraged, though, by that. Well, and we'll talk about celebrations next. I'm just going to go through these slides. And I know, too, trustees and for patrons listening, that they have this information was available prior for the trustees so that they could review this information, too. I want to highlight second grade and the strength of second grade. And third grade overall. This is a celebration in and of itself. And then again, the small blip you see on November are small groups of students that when I pulled the slides had started taking the assessment. So this next assessment window ends on November 19th for us. And so we have a readily formative check on student progress toward early literacy standards as we move through the course of the year. What you would see trend data is of this. Some of these standards are year-long standards, so it takes students time to learn some of those early literacy standards as they progress through those priorities and those success criteria through the course of the year. And so this upward trend that you see, some of the upward trend you see from last year are the changes in upward trends where you've got some staggered months and some less staggered months. Some of that could be contributed to what some of the experiences we had over last year in regards to the assessment itself and delivering that assessment. What you see in the course of this year is already that upward trend where by third grade, our goal is to make sure those early literacy standards are in place. That way, rather than reading as a skill, they're reading for comprehension. Okay?
Marcus, do you want folks to ask questions as you go, or?
Would it be okay if we went through like bulks of data and then we'll do questions after the celebrations? Does that work?
Yep, that works.
Okay, thank you, trustee, Madam Chair. Our celebrations. Here's the biggest one right here. Growth in reading standards at every grade level K3 is measured by ISBA. In a year, we're coming off of some areas of learning gaps, especially when you look at like early literacy standards and the progression of skills with that. You would expect some gaps of learning where direct instruction toward early literacy wasn't there previously, and so we'd accept some major gaps. What we're seeing with our ISBA data now, there aren't major gaps. In fact, we jumped right back into that upward mobility trend very quickly. November's data looks just as great coming in. We're just about 2/3 completed on it, though. And so one of the other focus is that even with a district-wide focus on math achievement, you can only shine your flashlight on so many pieces at one time. And so the risk you take when you shine flashlights on things is that you don't see the other things around you. When we very closely shine our flashlight on math achievement, what we do know is that core instruction in early literacy continues to remain very strong as comparable to previous historical trend data. Now, do we want to get better and improve? Absolutely. But what we do know is toward those year-long standards, especially when students hit third grade timeframes, we're looking at significant early literacy trends and achievement that way for students. And then, of course, that allows teachers then to design interventions and principals along with teacher collaborative teams to design interventions for smaller groups of students, knowing that the much larger group benefited from that initial first-time core instruction. So, Madam Chair, trustees, Superintendent Dr. Bubb, any questions in regards to early literacy?
Is there any questions from the board? Trustee Kloppenstein.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we've talked about this before, and I feel like I understand as well. I just want to make sure. Could you just go over the tiers just to make sure it's understood?
Trustee Kloppenstein, Madam Chair, the tiers in response to tiered student response to students, like the multi-tiered response to them?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what it is. It's just to be clear.
Okay, no, not a problem. So the tiers in the ISAT reporting is a little different. In fact, it's like a converse number. So when it comes to multi-tiered student supports, what we're looking at with that is saying students need different levels of supports at different levels. And through the lens of instruction, tier 1 is that effective core instruction. And if you think about a triangle, the vast majority of your students should benefit from that instruction at that tier 1 level. Highly effective, first-time instruction. That way, you have your smaller groups of students in tier 2 who then need intervention typically within a classroom level. That's teacher pulling aside a small group. That might be a teacher team and a collaborative team working together to design an intervention within a time frame in core instruction. It's a little less intensive, but really what it says is you didn't learn this particular skill that leads to this priority standard, so let's just come aside as a small group and work on it together. Still led by teacher that way. Then you look at tier 3. Tier 3 is that much more intensive intervention. These are students who really need the additional time, the additional support. Now what we have to make sure of is that additional time and support comes outside of core instruction, because you don't want to replace the core instruction with the intervention side of things. And so we have additional resources. We have target sites across the district in early intervention where we've said historically this trend data has demonstrated some challenges. And so what can we do to help support professional capacity through the lens of teaching and learning to build that up? In addition to that, we do receive some money from the state for early intervention in reading. It's called ERI funding. And so that early reading intervention funding comes to us. That matriculates to buildings where they get the personnel and can hire the great people to be able to do the work of intervention. But again, we always want to encourage the most highly skilled, capable teacher teaching the interventions, right? And making sure that we have a check for that, what that impact is having across the system. ISBA gives us that tool to measure that on a monthly basis. Absolutely, thank you.
Other questions? Trustee Kofeld.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll probably say this again after the math part too, but this is really exciting to me. And we talked about this in the summer at our workshop because the investment that the district is making to through coaching avenues, and there may be a lot of folks that don't know that these coaching and these professional learning groups, because kids are not widgets and they learn different ways and they have different challenges. And great teachers can hit roadblocks sometimes with, hey, what's the best way to connect with this child? And this avenue for coaching and self-reflection, I think, is huge. It can be a little uncomfortable at times. I totally get that. But my hope is, as we go through this, that's going to be embraced, because the end product is this benefits our kids because it's about as close as we can get to individualized instruction to help them get over their hurdles. So I really appreciate this. I'm excited about this, and I love these numbers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Mr. Myers, can you go back a slide to the third grade? I want to see if I am interpreting something correctly. So if I look at school year 2020 and the September start data of 11% red, I think it says 20% yellow and 69% green. And I look at the start data for 2021 with 12%, 17, and 70%. Can I make a good assessment here? Because September of 2020 was the first time we had kids back in school since March 13th of 2020 when COVID hit, to now 2021. It actually looks like our starting point was about the same in all of the grades, meaning the learning loss over summer was about the same learning loss over the COVID break period.
Madam Chair, that is a fair evaluation of the evidence through ISBA.
Thank you. I saw that in every grade level, and in some cases, actually, the learning loss over summer was worse than the learning loss over the COVID break period. I don't know why, but I just was curious on that. So.
Well, Madam Chair, there were less students tested at that time frame for a variety of reasons, so that changes it a little bit. But in all reality, the number of students within each of those that tiered system supports, where the green that you see in front of you are students who responded at that tier 1 level, tier 2, and then tier 3. You can see that that's exactly what we're looking at, is that yellow really signifies what's happening in the classroom with core instruction to close those learning gaps. Absolutely. And so same numbers of students to a degree, proportionally in both of those.
Yeah, and then by the end of the year, that gap was closed significantly, so that's a pretty big jump. I also wanted to just make sure I understand the term data dip as more like an oil dip, not a dip in the data. That's how you're referring it to. I was trying to figure out if I understood what you were saying on that.
Correct. Madam Chair, thank you for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start writing down vocabulary that we just tend to throw out there. And then what you're going to do is you're going to have these buzzers that you're going to hit, and it'll cue that I can't do that. So it is correct. And then when we say data dip, it is like lifting the hood, taking a dip right where is the car at this particular time frame, and diagnosing what's taking place that way. Okay. And so that is correct. It isn't a complete overhaul. It's a dip of data telling us what we need to do next to intervene.
Yeah. Checkpoint.
Yep,
Gotcha.
not a dip in the data.
Perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, so let's talk about K-5 mathematics standards. We use the tool iReady to measure progress toward K-5 mathematics standards. iReady in district-wide for us is new this year. We have had pockets of schools using this in the past as far as pilots and engaging our learning and how we might roll that out district-wide. The advantage to using a tool such as this is that it does provide data toward mathematics standards that teachers can drill down into that highlights skills, prerequisite skills students need to know in order to move forward in their learning. And so when you look at this data is a little different. This is why it's turned horizontally. And I'm going to walk through using this slide what it looks like knowing that we have this tool K8. So the first thing you can see, this is district-wide data. The green indicates mid or above grade level and early on grade level. So these are students who, where they're at now, are performing at that grade level end of year. If you look at the yellow, that says one grade level below, but these are benchmarks based off of this is what a student should know at the end of their school year. Does that make sense? So what the yellow tells us, it says one grade level behind. What that doesn't mean is a fifth grader working at the fourth grade level. What that means is this is a fifth grader who's starting the school year with what they came with fourth grade skills, and now they're ready to learn fifth grade skill. So the yellow represents core instruction, where the vast majority of students should benefit from effective first-time instruction. And so what you would see over time in this model is that yellow distance of the yellow closing, because with effective core instruction, you have more kids crossing the line into what they should know, do, and be able to understand by fifth grade. But again, some of these are year-long standards, and so you would expect some of this movement to happen gradually over time, and then you would reach a time frame closer toward the end of the school year where you notice significant jumps, because some of those final skills, some of what they need to know is going to cross that fifth grade line. What's really nice about this tool that we have with iReady is that the assessment itself is adaptive. So it will let us know where students are performing on a much larger spectrum of skills in mathematics, and will adjust accordingly. The assessment will adjust accordingly to really give us an accurate picture of where they're functioning at. And so this is overall this way, but as we move through the grade levels, well, let me go back. I'm sorry, I moved just a little too quickly. And so when you look at the yellow, that's really what we focus on in core instruction. That's really what we're focusing on. And this is where we should be now. I know it looks a little concerning with 26% at mid or above or early on grade. What that really means, though, is that overall with our students in K-5, 26% already have the skills for that next grade level, even though they just started the grade level they're in now. Okay? What's great is that a teacher can click on the data at the bottom there, for example, a number in operations. It'll list not only the skill, but the prerequisite skill students need to know, do, and be able to understand in order to be successful in first-time instruction. And it will detail item analysis for those students as well, exactly what they can and can't do. I included this slide, and it takes a moment to kind of see what's happening within this slide. But basically what this represents is where we're at in the district. That would be you can see that's the U column in that. National year to date. So this is national data. This is because iReady is such a large tool and used by millions of students across the United States in multiple districts, we can collect national data toward this. And so it does give us a picture of national data trends and what's happening. And then also you can see historical national trends on the norm piece there. And so what happens when you look at this is we can say, as a district compared nationally, how are we doing with where our students are at now? So for example, in kindergarten, year to date nationally, when I pulled this about a week ago, 15% of students were at that above that grade level. You can see 85% were at that grade level mark. In West Data, we're significantly above those national trends there within kindergarten that way. Same thing happens in each of those grade levels in 1st through 5th as we take a look at this data, but it really does tell us core instructionally. This isn't the excuse for where our students are performing, because we are going to outdo those, but we want to make absolutely sure that are we staying together with national trends in regards to our response to core instruction that way. This is 6 through 8 mathematics standards. Something interesting here to note, notice how much significantly smaller the yellow is as compared to that. That is good news for us. What that means is that core instructionally, the transition from 5th to 6th and what's happening over the course of middle school paints a better picture than we had anticipated with ISAT data. Now again, this is one data dip in time with our students, and we want to keep that in mind along with all the other measurements that teachers use to measure student progress. But again, This is one data dip in time, but it does paint a more accurate picture of what's happening in 6th through 8th grade mathematics, especially since we can drill down into particular domain areas within mathematics. Same thing here in regards to national trends and historic national trends. Another nice piece about iReady data is that because we'll be collecting this data over time, K-8, we'll have more and more data dips. So before the end of this year, we'll have 3 data dips that tells us where we're at. All right, our celebrations. This data provides a clear picture of instructional domain focus. I mean, we could drill right down into the domains, exactly what kids can and can't do. The yellow provides an indicator of effective core instruction. So rather than just saying how well are we at fixing the problem at the end through interventions, what we're really talking about is how well do we do in preventing it from happening in the first place instructionally. And then lastly, we're comparable at or above national norms in all of those grade levels. So any questions about K-8 mathematics as measured by iReady?
Any questions from the board? Trustee Kloppenstein.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I was curious, is it possible to even go all the way down to the students?
It is. Absolutely drills right down into students. We're going to talk about some of the planning we have in place as far as individualized student progress reporting.
Excellent, thank you.
Absolutely.
Trustee Ozuna.
What kind of feedback are you getting from our educators now that they've been through this testing cycle once and how they're using the information?
Yeah, Trustee, Madam Chair, it's varied feedback. I think part of it is we've needed the tool for quite a while. And so the feedback prior to having the tool is we need a tool to have a common assessment across our district toward mathematics. And that needs to span K-12. We need to know where our students are at. So the feedback is much more of an improvement feedback loop to saying within the, here's an appropriate time frame, because you want to do a data dip at an instructional time frame that makes sense. But it doesn't always have to end at like end of unit. So we got to think at this time frame of the year, where are students at? So that is feedback that we receive. Some of the feedback is in regards to what to do with the data. And so because we're learning this data together and we're saying, here's the data picture that paints for us now, how does this impact core instruction? What's the best way to use this tool to impact core instruction? So a lot of that feedback comes through the professional development that we create as a result of having the data right in front of us. So rather than waiting to the end of the year and then creating professional development opportunities, academic leadership team sits down and looks at the data and says, here's our area of need. What can we do to address that area now on the full day collaboration days and the in-service days that we have available to us?
Follow-up?
Knowing that we all celebrate student achievement, I imagine that there'll be a lot more support for this as it goes on and we see those numbers continue to rise. So I sure do appreciate everything that they're doing.
I have a couple of questions for you. Those students that are in green, that are at grade level at the beginning of the year, what do we do with, so I've always kind of worried about those students that are at grade level. What do we do for them?
So as Madam Chair, as part of our work with professional learning communities, of the 4 essential questions that we ask each other when we sit down and hold that mirror up based off of the evidence that we have on this data, one of the questions is, what do we want students to know? How are we going to respond? How do we know if they've learned it or not? So that's the tool in front of us here. The other piece is, what are we going to do if they haven't learned it? And then what are we going to do if they have? And so it creates those enrichment opportunities. I think what's nice about this is it provides it through the lens of both sides, right? We have not only our students learning the material, what can we do to provide enrichment toward a priority standard to say, how can we help, how can we teach the student to transfer those skills into other areas, knowing that they know it already? But then also it helps us gauge instructionally, because differentiating, which means teaching at different levels in core instruction, not only do we teach to the lower learners within the team and making sure they've shored up those skills, but we want to make sure we teach to students who have reached that level and some of those higher learners, so that we're differentiating across a larger spectrum rather than just always gravitating toward the lower end of students.
Mm-hmm. So we're making, I like our celebrations kind of, is that in our adjustments? That's kind of some adjustments we're making. Is that what I understand?
Yeah, Chairman Johnson, absolutely. And we're making them on the fly. So we're not waiting for a time frame to say, okay, now we can put enrichment into place. What we're saying is, based on where students are at now, here's how I'm going to adjust my daily instruction to provide for some of that.
Mm-hmm. It would, this has been one of my kind of soapbox items for kids that are at grade level, not getting bored and kind of progressing backwards or not progressing at all during a year. so it would be really helpful, and I don't know if you can do it or if it may be like a follow-up later, but to kind of understand how the teacher does adjust on the fly for those kids and how they continue to push them to excel forward. Because it's easy to see how to bring, not easy, and it's not easy to do, but it's easier to see the movement that needs to come up. I think it's harder to see how do you push them forward. And so that's what I was looking for, is maybe some understanding of how that adjustment gets made in the classroom. That'd be helpful to just kind of understand how that works in the future, unless you already can talk through that.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. I think in our future conversations, because we can come back with your permission, we'll come back to the table here and continue to have those conversations. Today, and especially at the beginning of the year, highlights similar conversations we have with building leadership, right? Till we say, here's what the data picture tells us. How are we going to respond with core instruction? And then that next question is, okay, now how are we differentiating, providing intervention and enrichment? We just want to make sure that we shore up those. So I'll have a better answer to the specifics. I can tell you typically what happens within a highly effective instruction classroom to be able to monitor and adjust for that. But it's very similar to adjusting to the lower end of learners as adjusting to the high, but very specific examples of exactly what's happening across the district. I'll have that to you after our second diagnostic, which is in the third week of January to the first week of February.
Okay, great. Thank
Absolutely.
you. I think the other question I had, I've gotten the iStation data home, I think every month now I've been getting it. How are we involving, or are we doing that yet, or is that on our roadmap? How parents can use this data, so how they can help support or understand, or how are we kind of bringing the parents into that conversation?
Madam Chair, very much appreciate that question, and I address it on the second to last slide right here on our progress toward progress reporting.
Perfect. All right, thank you.
Perfect. All right. So let's talk high school. High school is a learning point for all of us in regards to what evidence convicts us of student learning at high levels within core instruction in our high school math classes. I can tell you, through needing a common formative assessment, so a common check of understanding as time goes by in these classes, this was an absolute point of need. It was true across the district, but definitely something within our high school courses that way. And I think that the conversation with building principals within end of year data talks, this conversation would come up frequently. How do we gauge our impact on core instruction in high school math? And so when we changed our instructional model of math instruction at a high school level, so it's a tool called CPM, which is College Preparatory Mathematics. Basically what it does is it changes high school instruction from like a sit and get direct instruction type, where students get the information, they practice the information, they question the information, and they test on the information at the end of a unit. What this does is it is a cyclical cycle of skills and prerequisite skills and standards through a collaborative team environment where students are actively working with math, actively engaging in math. So it is an entirely different instructional model for many of our math teachers in high school at this point. And I think that we've done some of this work, started this work in middle school in the past couple of years, but we're doing this work now in middle school. And so when you think, what does the data tell us about core instructional pieces? What we're doing now is using much more observational data. Our data becomes more of a, what are the non-negotiables within each of those classrooms to ensure that we're using those collaborative structures. And then the data we have, which our tool now is called Achieve 3000. Achieve 3000 reports very similar to the same way iReady reports. So the reason we don't have iReady, the same tool in high school, is because it's not made for high school. It stops at 8th grade. And so although we can use some of the diagnostics, it doesn't go up high enough to be able to gauge some of those higher learners that way. What Achieve 3000 does is it presents data very similar to the way iReady does, so we don't have a transition lag between 8th and 9th grade. So the same data can be used as we transition students up. And so by using this tool, it gives us a range by which students typically fall within a set of skills. And so what it says is you have an X number of students that fall within this range, and it presents a different data picture, but it's a very similar data picture to what you saw in iReady. Here are the students who are ready for core instruction. Here are the students who need additional prerequisite skills to benefit from core instruction, and here are the students who are above core instruction and need to differentiate up. The other nice piece around Achieve 3000 is it does present a highly effective instructional tool for our labs in high school. and it's diagnostic in that the assessment itself is diagnostic, and then students can work directly with the skills they don't know or do know within those lab environments, and it is an effective tool that way. I do want you to know that this is a new instructional piece for us this year. Our teachers are learning how to use this. Our leaders are learning how to monitor this, engage and change instruction based off of data. And so that conversation continues. But the instructional change, because it's a district-wide high school instructional change, that really is where their learning is focused. So making changes from data right now isn't their focus. It's being consistent in the way in which we deliver that new type of instruction that way. But we still have the measurement in place to say, based on our efforts, how is that impacting student progress toward those learning standards? And then, of course, we have some additional assessments within the CPM model as well that we're using to gauge that instruction as well. So what will happen is within Achieve 3000, because it was a benchmark test that told us where we're at now, and the intent was for that Tier 3 intervention we talked about recently, the core improvement side of this, what are we doing with the data, really resides with how do we consistently implement this different type of instructional model across the district. It is a tremendous undertaking for our high school teachers and for our high school administrators who are very much learning something new from the ground up in mathematics instruction, and their courage is absolutely admirable, and can't tell you the work of them and then the work of our math curriculum teams and our leads with Patricia Vandenberg to really do some incredible work, and the coaching that's involved in that process as well. So we do have an assessment for that as well. Let's see. Our celebrations, again, I mentioned this, it's our common assessment for measurement of math, something that we need and something we now have. And so using that data becomes what our next important step is. Standards are reported out in these things called quartiles, which basically it's a skill set that says if a student can do this, here's their quartile, but also if a student scores in this quartile, here's everything they can do, know, and be able to understand based off of this assessment. And again, it's a one-time data dip of where they're at, but again, we're using it to drive lab placement and instruction within lab. It does give us comparable and national norms in all grade levels, and ours are similar to that. And it is a very focused area of learning for our collaborative teams, but one in which we're very intentionally teaching and learning together through the work of instructional coaching. Any questions around high school before I jump into our areas in the work so far? There's 2 more slides.
Trustee Ozuna.
Thanks, Mr. Myers.
Yeah.
I know that the middle schools implemented CPM earlier than the high schools did. How long did it take, and when I say long, I know a couple of years probably, I'm guessing, but how long did it really take them to get comfortable teaching? And do you expect the same thing with the high school instructors there?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Trustee Ozuna, that's tough to gauge, and the reason it's tough to gauge is because a year of that implementation was during last school year. And so in a collaborative environment where you need kids working around a table together within that environment, it presented challenges doing some of that online, in an online environment. Now we've learned in how to adapt and change with that, but in rolling out that collaborative model, we then jumped to hybrid online models, which then provided another area of challenge for that. I think what we've done then is say, okay, knowing what we learned and didn't learn as adults within the system to build that professional capacity within CPM, what can we do to help support middle school too? And so the same structure with math leads who are then become coaches. We also have additional coaches within middle school, knowing that based on our evidence, that was a significant area of need as well. And then just essentially revamping and restarting that process around that collaborative instruction through the tool of CPM.
Thank you. One follow-up, Madam Chair. Are the students more comfortable moving into high school with the CPM? I mean, given the ones that have been through some of this with middle school, I imagine there's some great benefit in that.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Trustee, absolutely. That collaborative environment takes some practice because there are roles and responsibilities associated with each student around a group. And so by practicing those roles and responsibilities, it leads to higher levels of learning through engaged discussion and through engaged meaningful practice within math. They're using and manipulating math. And so that takes a level of comfort to work within teams that way. But as evidenced by all of us sitting in this room here today and the evidence of what we do daily in work, we work in teams. That's what we do. And so it teaches those lifelong skills as well and really engages learners in that process. So based on our observations and the evidence that we have and the feedback we receive, they're more comfortable with it and getting more comfortable with it every day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Trustee Buffy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Myers, so with the testing of going from iReady to the Achieve 3000 for high school, are there any challenges with monitoring growth or the transition between middle school and high school because of that?
Madam Chair, Trustee Buffy, there are challenges associated with interpreting and what to do with the data because it's a newer data set for us. Even though it's reporting to grade level standards, you want to, if we're going to take the data, we need to do something with it well, right? And so, but the challenge isn't the transition from 8th to 9th grade because it reports in the same, within the same measurement tool and factors. It's just a different product that way. So it reports in the same quartile. So basically it takes standards and it breaks it up into these numerical values in a scope and sequence and say, if a student scores within this numerical range, here are the skills they can do. iReady does that same thing. It just reports it a little differently, but it's the same reporting mechanism. It's just a different tool, if that makes sense. I hope so. And we purposely purchased that particular tool for that reason.
Thank you. Trustee Kofelt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Myers, just for clarity, is this one, I know we had talked about the analysis of the data was going to be done much more frequently now. So I believe it was every 9 weeks. Is that, or am I off on my?
No, Madam Chair, Trustee Kofelt, some of the data sets that we take are a 9-week cycle. Others are longer in that. The reason it's a little longer is because once you start taking data points in time, the diagnostic of what happens. So the diagnostic allows us to basically say, as compared to this grade level set of standards, here's where students lie instructionally on that measurement. That is much less frequently than 9 weeks that way. In fact, that's why the most recent one ended at the end of October, and the next one is in January, and then there's a final one in spring that way. The 9-week cycle reflects more on when we come together as a team, what is the evidence that convicts us we're working toward making progress on those assessments that way. So a lot of those are formative assessments, the early literacy check that takes place on a 4-month basis. And then these tools do have progress monitoring opportunities. You can watch and see students' progress toward those larger diagnostics.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. So what are we doing with this data now that we have it? The first thing I want to celebrate this, which is collaborative teams. And I'm going to read this because I don't want to mess it up because it's so important and it's such a big step for us with systemic professional learning communities here. Collaborative teams of academic leadership, what that represents is all of the academic departments, the coordinators, the coaches, the supervisors within all of those departments. Not just curriculum instruction. That's everything from health services to counseling to curriculum instruction to assessment to CTE, all of those academic departments. And the principals who are in collaborative teams of usually 3 or 4 principals, and they're in collaborative teams based off of their spring math data. So there's a commonality to why they're in the particular teams they're in. So imagine a group of 3 or 4 principals and a group of 6 or 7 academic leadership people all meeting together on a monthly basis around a common target, around common strategies, talking about effective practices and how to build and support each other up. Essentially what happens is these principals get to meet with an army of people who are showing up at the door to say, what can we do together to build and help support? This is on a systemic schedule. The first meeting of that, of those larger groups, took place over the past few weeks from October 27th to November 19th. And so by doing that, the feedback from that process and the value of what's happening, everybody's going to report out their target, their evidence, their action, and how they're going to communicate it to teams within the school when we meet on November 30th. And so you can see now, rather than the responsibility of student progress stopping and leaving at a principal's door at the doorstep of a collaborative team in a building, it's a much larger systemic process to provide those supports that way. That took a tremendous amount of courage to step into there and invite people in and look at this shared data together, and the feedback has been tremendous and an indicator of successful systemic PLCs at work, okay? Another big piece, benchmarks data available for all teachers, for all students in the building. This is a huge piece. We've had this in early literacy, to have this in mathematics, and to also have it on the ELA side, which I didn't address today and focus on mathematics. We have that as well, K-12. So this is some major undertakings, some major steps in that. That data is readily available through a tool that we have developed in-house, that they can access that data. And a teacher in the building can see all other students' data. So it's not just specific to their students in their classroom, but if we're going to work together as a team to move progress, we need to see the data of student progress that way. And then under development, there is a team working on progress reporting for students and parents, guardians, based on benchmark data. So essentially saying, based on this evidence, on this data dip, here's where your child is at now toward these priority standards. There is a personal touch to this in that on the format of what we have now, they are hard copy reports that are going home. The numbers are only as beneficial as how we explain it to parents though and talk about this is what this means behind this. And so short videos, short pieces where it's a real West Data person there standing and talking about here's your child's I-Ready benchmark in January. Here's what it tells us about their learning. Here's what we're going to do moving forward. And we creating those as a team and generating those and sending those to buildings so that they can hand those out and make sure that those get home in the hands of parents. We also do have technology-based solutions too, where an email is sent out and they can pull progress reporting that way to see what it looks like. This is under development. It's a major step because we want to roll it out in a way that's informative to parents and informative to students, and so it becomes a progress and a celebration point for those families as well. So there is that in place that's done systemically rather than left up to an individual building to make some of those decisions. Okay. And then Leadership Institute, that's what we talked about before. We're on November 30th. This whole process is going to start again, and we're going to continue the work of what does the evidence tell us, where are our targets, what is our action, and how are we going to communicate this out. And then lastly, this last slide is just the tools that we have available. I just wanted to highlight some of this. What you see in that leadership notebook is all the tools a leader has in front of them to access that data and that information. Where you see on the top right there with assessment accountability, that is that data dashboard. Obviously, I didn't click on that for various reasons there, but you can see that that data is already available for all leaders and all teachers in each building. And then these are our strategic action planning documents that we use to document progress within those collaborative teams that way. All right, and Madam Chair, trustees, thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to entertain those.
Is there any other questions? Mr. Myers, I would just, one quick one on the parent, on the if you go back a slide, I can't remember what you called it now. I lost my train of thought, but on the under development piece around the student parent guardian benchmark data, what's kind of the timeline for that being ready to go?
Our goal target is for some grade levels, we'll be able to have this ready to go at second semester. Goal target though is across the district at third quarter.
Third quarter, okay.
So at the end of that third diagnostic is where we would be at. Knowing that, that gives us a picture of doing it every quarter as we move into next year.
Okay, great. I think that'll really help. You know, not everybody's experience is the same, but my experience in this, on the mathematics piece of things is, I have a child in advanced math, but I haven't seen anything this year yet, and so I called the teacher and we talked through it, but just having that confirmation around how my students doing versus what they tell me, because sometimes that's different, is really a good validation, so I appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We invest a tremendous amount of time and opportunity and resources into our benchmarking, and to be able to have a conversation with parents to say, here's what the evidence tells us and here's what we're doing together as a system. But again, always through the lens of this benchmark is one tool to gauge your child's measurement of learning progress toward these priority standards. It's not the tool itself, it's about their progress.
But it helps you to know where to help
does.
at, or how to help at home, which is something that I think clarity for parents is really helpful, because if we know how to help, we will. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I think I hit the wrong button. Trustee Clappin.
I'm going to board the plane. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Myers, I just want to commend you on this plan and what you're doing to move forward. I remember back in, was it 2019, 2018 almost, where you walked me through Meridian Elementary when you were the principal over there, and you were like, you know, showing on a whiteboard how every kid is going to be monitored, every kid is being brought up and made sure that they're attended to. And it's so cool to see the evolution over time. You've never veered from your mission, and you've always had this great plan. It's just really fun to see it grow. So thank you.
Madam Chair, Trustee, we have very good people who are work very hard to get the job done for kids and engage in the process of teaching and learning each and every day. And absolutely cannot do without every single one of them, so they're good people. Thank you.
Sometimes lightning strikes and the person gets in the right spot, Marcus. So, thank you so much. I think if you guys don't mind a little break before we go into the next item. All right, great. We'll take a 5-minute break and come back at, well, I guess we'll be a 6-minute break, 7:45. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Troy. All right, welcome back. Our next discussion item up on the agenda is our COVID-19 protocols. And at the October 13th board meeting, this board acted on what it would take to rediscuss the mask requirements in our schools, and we adopted some triggers. We've now touched one of those triggers. It's in process today. We may have a couple others happen before then, we don't know. And so we wanted to have the administration come back before the board. And since we've got that trigger touched now, it's moving forward, the vaccine trigger. Wanted to have Dr. Bubb come before the board and share with us what some next steps might be that the administration would recommend regarding masks in schools. And then we also have Director Duke from Central District Health on the line, because I know another one of our triggers was the community data. And we've also had some conversations with Central District Health and the state around the delay in the data and information. And so we asked him to come be available for board questions remote. As Dr. Bubb went over the data already for where we're at, but I think it'll probably be, I'm assuming, just because I've had at least one trustee ask for some update on kind of what our backlog is on the data from a community standpoint as well. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Dr. Bubb first to walk us through the administration's recommendations. And then after that, we can have questions for Mr. Duke or Dr. Bubb, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chair, trustees, Troy, perfect. I want to kind of walk through what our vision here was for this. As we kind of move through COVID-19 and some of our safety protocols, we wanted to come up with a plan that had some long-term sustainability. We are convinced that COVID-19 is not going to just be gone, and so something that we can deal with for a system that we can play within for long-term. We wanted to look at administrative ease, let our school personnel work what they're best at, educating our kids, and then some catastrophic monitoring procedures. We didn't want to just walk away from everything, but actually have some procedures in place. And so in our last meeting, or the last meeting we discussed this, we kind of talked about this green, yellow, red procedure, and meeting with Tracy Gardner and meeting with some of our regional leads, walked through what this might look like. And in a green situation with a trigger being met, we could look at a green situation being 2% or lower. For schools fewer than 250 students, which becomes problematic, right? If you have a small school, a couple cases could hit that trigger pretty quickly. So for schools lower than 250 students, we'd look at a rolling 10-day average of positive cases. But really that 2% threshold, in that 2% threshold, we'd have mask optional. Students that exhibit COVID-19 related symptoms should stay home. I think this is going to be our biggest push moving forward, is if you're sick, stay home. Contact tracing would be managed by Central District Health. And then we work on those universal precautions, washing hands, distance as much as you can, continue to sanitize the educational environment. Only students that would be quarantined in this system would be if they have a household exposure or they are symptomatic at the time of the quarantine. In a yellow, and I'll compare the two, so green goes from mask optional, yellow it goes to mask recommended, and what that really looks like is if we're in 2 to 4% range, what that looks like is you have, it goes to mask recommended. That would mean signs would come back up and we would say we recommend, as a school district, we recommend that students and staff wear masks. Students that exhibit COVID-19 related symptoms should still stay home. From a contact tracing standpoint, we look very much like we would look today. Parents would then be notified of positive cases. This really came up, interesting conversation, as we worked through this with some of our district professionals. One of the things that happens as parents get notified on cases is a lot of times they go, oh, there was an active case in my school, and they kind of put that to the side. This would be a noticeable difference between the green and the yellow. They would say, oh, something is going on within the school, because now I'm being notified. I wasn't being notified before. Full sanitization procedures would also be in place. That includes universal precautions, hand washing, all of those things. And then only students, again, who are household exposures and or symptomatic would be quarantined. That's at 2 to 4%. For schools fewer than 250 students, again, we'd look at a rolling 10-day average. And then red really is at 4% or higher. If we hit 4% or higher within our schools, we would immediately contact CDH and look for guidance when it comes to this. That's when we'd have to look into a mask environment. Again, students that exhibit COVID-19 related symptoms would have to stay home. Full contact tracing would be implemented. There would be a test out procedure possible. Next slide. And what we tried to do as we go through this is really break it down for what does it look like for everybody. In a green schedule, students are here, and really green, yellow, or red, barring any change from CDH or any mandate from CDH. Our kids would be able to be in school 5 days a week. Face coverings would go from optional in green to recommended in yellow to required in red. Family expectations, and I think this is going to be a big piece. Checks children for symptoms. We continue to ask people to check children for symptoms. In green and yellow, 24 hours after symptoms they'd be able to return. For teachers and staff, self-monitor for symptoms. Stay home if you're sick. Teach and reinforce hand hygiene and respiratory etiquette. Coughing, sneezing, things like that. Contact tracing in green. Central District Health is managed it. In yellow, parents are notified. And then in red, we go back to full contact tracing. Quarantining, again, only students who are have household exposures. Mom or dad have it. You see them every day. We do have a possibility of students being able to quarantine within their own house, or a sick person being able to quarantine with their own house. We've worked with CDH on that. Only students in yellow, that's the same thing. And then in red, that's when things get really serious, and we really have to look at controlling contagious spread within the schools. So with that, I will, there's also, with this, obviously, we would maintain our testing possibilities for students to be able to test out if they're in exposure. After 3 days, we allow students to come back with a negative test on day 4. I will open it up. I know we have Mr. Duke on the line here. I think maybe we should open it up for Mr. Duke first to ask kind of community numbers, give us a foundation for this conversation, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions that I can.
Thank you. Actually, if you don't mind, I think I'll open it up for the board to ask questions, and we have Mr. Duke on the line if we need for other questions. But I think since you gave us the COVID numbers earlier, probably good to hear them, unless you wanted to hear Trustee Ozuna around kind of where we're at on the backlog first, or if the board wanted to hear that. Trustee Ozuna.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a question for Director Duke related to the numbers that are on the CDH website that I'm hoping you can help me understand. Director Duke, are you on?
I am, yes.
Great. Thank you for being on the line for us tonight. So my question is, one of our triggers was around moderate spread in the community as defined by CDC. And the CDC defines that as cases per 100,000 in the past 7 days as 10 to 49.99 and percent positivity between 5 to 7.99%. That's accurate, right?
Yes, it is.
Thanks. So on the CDH website, there's a couple different links. One of them has a link to CDC, where CDC defines Ada County as red transmission. And then there's a dashboard that CDH has in place where you can drill down for Ada County. And drilling down into the Ada County numbers, it shows that our percent positivity for Ada County, the most recent numbers out there, is 6.9, which is in that moderate spread category. And then cases per 100,000 with a 7-day moving average are 16.5, again, in the moderate category. My question is how does do we show those numbers? And it looks like the numbers are up to date with what's out there. So how do those numbers appear to be moderate, but CDH or CDC is showing that as high? Is there a difference between the 7-day moving average and what CDC posted for in past 7 days? Are they adding up all of the cases over a 7-day period as opposed to a rolling average?
Yeah, so I guess when I look at our data in Ada County, the most recent total count for the number of cases that was as of November 7th, and that's pretty much up to date, was 579 cases. So we're meeting the moderate metric for the positivity rate, which is more of an indicator of are we doing adequate testing given the rate of disease in our community, but we're still well above moderate for the actual number of cases per 100,000 in the last 7 days.
Follow-up?
Thank you. Can I just clarify? So the 16.5 cases per 100,000 that use the average, that's different than what CDC is using for the cases for the past 7 days? So they're adding the cases over 7 days as opposed to that rolling average?
Yeah, right, that's correct. So what is it, on our website where you'll see moderate, it says the total new cases per 100,000 people in the last 7 days. And we have about a little close to 500,000 people. So we're above the threshold to remain in the high category. So it's actually the total number of new cases per 100,000 in the past 7 days.
Follow-up. Director Duke, is that on the dashboard in a place where we can see that?
Sure. So I'll pull it up here on my laptop. So if you go into, you can see district-wide information, county COVID data, syndromic surveillance, and healthcare information.
Mm-hmm.
And what you'll select on that page is county COVID data. And then right below that, you'll see Ada County, and the furthest bar to the right, that was the most recent full week reported out. There were 579 cases during the week that ended November 7th.
And so from a CDC perspective for moderate, you're looking at that number to be less than what?
It would be about 250 cases per week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Trustee Kofelt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my question's for Dr. Bubb, and I might have a follow-up if that's okay, depending upon how well he does with the first wave. No. Do we have any of our schools that would fall outside the green category right now?
Madam Chair, Trustee Kofelt, no, we do not have any schools that would fall outside of that right now. Our current case count's at 23. Yeah, I looked at it earlier, probably about 4 o'clock today. Our current case count district-wide is about 23 cases.
Okay. And a quick follow-up. Have we ever had any schools that would have fallen into the red category?
Madam Chair, Trustee Kofelt, no. That red category would be, we would be on the phone with CDH, or Russ would probably, Mr. Duke would probably be on the phone with me.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm going to have to look to Mr. Heller because this was last year, but we had a pretty significant issue at one of our high schools last year. Did we not hit 4% at that point? What percentage did we hit?
We didn't even hit the 2% threshold at those high schools in their largest spike.
We closed it down for remote at that time, correct?
That is correct, and if you remember, most of that reason was operational because we had so many staff issues with staff shortages. That ended up leading us to moving schools to remote because we didn't have the critical staff in order to keep that school open for that period of time.
Okay.
Madam Chair, as a mechanism to try to develop some of these guidelines, I had Tracy Gardner poll our schools district-wide.
Sorry, because we're on this train of thought, I have a question around that. So we would set a category percentage so high that we haven't followed our historical pattern? Like, I'm trying to understand would we hit an operational issue before we would hit this 4%? Is that what we're saying?
Madam Chair, I think the difference historically is we now have a vaccine available for our kids. I think that would be the biggest difference. To be this, I mean, to give it a perspective, and Mr. Duke, you could be able to chime in for a second. I believe the flu is 10% is when that becomes really concerning. And so with the availability of the vaccine, I mean, obviously this gives us some measures to be able to and that's why I call them catastrophic monitoring. We'd really be looking at if things got really serious within our schools.
One of the things I don't want to do is create an expectation that this is the be-all, end-all. So if we are going to use this, is this just for mass? Because what I'm worried about is that situation we had in the high school last year. If we had that again, vaccine or not, it was actually it was an operational issue. We had staff out. This says here how that would work. Would you still be able to make that operational decision based on the board adopting this policy?
Madam Chair, yeah, we would still be able, if there's operational issues that came in, we would still be able to I mean, so if you go back to the policy, superintendent still has the ability to adjust based on that.
Trustee Ozuna.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Along those lines, I'm uncomfortable with the thresholds that are on here when we move in that direction. I don't think it gives us the flexibility that we need if we run into a problem. I would rather see us, when we're moving toward a mask optional environment, I would rather leave it open for you to make decisions on a case-by-case basis as needed based on what's out there than to set some parameters that we're only going to hit if things are likely catastrophic. I would be more comfortable in that space.
I'm going to weigh in because having been through a red, green, yellow situation where the parameters weren't all really, things changed enough, I see the same thing. When I read this the first time, I thought it was good, and I really appreciate our nurses in our schools putting it together because I think that was the right audience, and I'm glad we did that for the first time. But the way I read this, we lose the operational authority. And so, or at least in literal language reading of it, this is what would happen in a 4% positivity, and so, or less than 4% positivity. So I guess I would have the concern of boxing in for things that maybe need to be handled from an operational standpoint. Trustee Kofelt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And maybe this question is for Mr. Duke. From a community standpoint, with CDH, what is the percentage of the community, if we're looking at percentages, what's the percentage of the community that falls within green, yellow, red?
So when you look at it's really based on the question that was asked earlier, is the number of cases per 100,000 over a 7-day period. So to be in green with the Centers for Disease Control guidance, we'd have to have fewer than 50 cases per week. And then it goes up from there to where substantial, in order to get to the substantial level, which is one step down from high, and you got to understand there's 4 tiers instead of 3 as proposed in the guideline here, we'd have to have fewer than 500 cases per week.
Follow? I believe
and that's for the whole county.
For the whole county. I believe Dr. Bubb mentioned this number, you know, and I'm going to equate, not that they're exactly the same, but the flu to COVID, and now that there's a vaccine available all the way down to 5 years old. What was that threat? Was it 10% for the flu?
This is Russ. I'm not sure I understand that.
Dr. Bubb?
Mr. Duke, what would be the threshold in which CDH would intervene with a flu breakout within a school?
So that's a great question, and I don't know of a specific threshold. For example, if you were to have a class where most of the children in a classroom were sick, we might, we'd give certain guidance for that classroom and maybe the students that were exposed, but I'm not familiar with a specific threshold that we would recommend a school be closed. And that generally is what we've done. We've never recommended mask use. It just wasn't something that was considered in the past prior to this pandemic.
Thank you. And just to follow up, Madam Chair, from my perspective, one of the things that we talked early on with this was to empower the superintendent and his staff and the folks that are in the trenches every day to design a plan that's going to enable them to facilitate our goal of educating the kids while also creating an environment that allows them to react and remain flexible to changes. Dr. Bubb and his team has come up with this plan. Overall, within the guidelines, it does say that the superintendent, this is a decision matrix. So part of that decision process could fall in if we suddenly had a lack of staff to teach the kids. And so he still has that ability, at least as I read it, to make that change. And so, I would be supportive of this plan if this is what Dr. Bubb and his team feels like will enable them to accomplish the goals that we've kind of set for him, to maintain in-person learning and to keep our kids safe. Thank you.
Maybe I'll provide a little history because I think the history is important here. So, and Trustee Ozuna and Kloppenstein and myself have this history of red, green, and yellow. When we started the school year in 2020, we adopted in July a red, green, yellow, how to get kids back in school and what red, green, and yellow meant. And so here's the criteria. We had the criteria, and then we had the actions or decisions based on that criteria. And at the beginning of the year, the board decided that we would start in a red for a week and we would go to a yellow, which was a hybrid learning. That movement to yellow was outside of our criteria. We decided to make that decision even though the criteria from a public health standpoint didn't say we should go to a hybrid in yellow. And what we experienced was a number of constituents who said, and patrons who said, you made a plan and now you're not sticking it. We don't trust that anymore. So that's where I get uncomfortable, is putting a criteria like this in place. I get what you're saying on, the flexibilities there, but I think people count on this stuff and they read it very literal, and the practical implications of it become different for different people depending on how they feel about these policies. So I'm actually, oddly enough, arguing for more flexibility than what's in the criteria of this, because I think that actually allows for the example that we had last year, which is a high school with a significant impact to our teachers, our staff, and our students that needed to just take a 2-week break. And the superintendent at the time made that decision. It worked out really well. In fact, it was actually this week last year. And the patrons at that school also understood what was going on, and it didn't impact the entire district. So I guess that's probably my concern around the boxing in of this criteria. Trustee Ozuna.
One of the big concerns that I have looking at this, aside from the percentages that are in there, in the red category, it's full contact tracing by our team. That's a significant effort that would be really hard for them to undertake. I also have some concerns related to contact tracing in green, and I think moving contact tracing to Central District Health, unfortunately right now, probably means that there's no notification, and I do think that there's still advantages where we're at today and clear up to that 2% mark for parents and staff to be notified if there's a positive case within their child's classroom. I think that families can make decisions based on that, or at least have the option to make decisions based on that. What I don't want is to put significant work effort back onto our teams, but if the process used today is working for our staff to do just sharing of that information within a classroom, not the actual full contact tracing, but I would like to see that continued. I think that there's a lot of value in that.
Any other comments? Trustee Kloppenstein.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. You know, I have to admit, I'm probably the one who's going to be odd to be saying this, but I think the reality is I mean, some countries are starting to do this. Eventually the United States will do this, is we'll start to recognize that this is no longer a pandemic, it's an endemic. And I think the reality is that, you know, the only thing that's really going to save this district, or all districts really, from having to go about this conflict, it seems, about, or this questioning about having this structure in place, is really to have everyone vaccinated. That's not something we can mandate. I don't want to even go there. But at the same time, to at least have that choice. And so I agree that these hard numbers, I remember back when we had that discussion back last year, one of the things that was creating whiplash, especially for the teachers, was we'd go from one to the other, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we got to increase this, and then we go back to another level, and we have to decrease, and well, wait a minute, I don't understand. It was just really a lot of sudden changes, and each one of those changes was a large investment in infrastructure that they'd have to do. So it just seemed to be, I understand, if we go from a 3.9 to a 4.1, I could just see us going like this, and those people in that school would just be, again, whiplash. And it doesn't really help and support education, and it doesn't really get us back to really maybe what the goal of this is to how do we get this into how do we understand this is never going to go away? I mean, coronavirus is with us for the rest of our lives, right, basically. And so it's going to be in the schools, at least for the next couple of years, in a heavy state. So how do we transition? Maybe the idea is more, what is the transition to have, to deal with flare-ups? And knowing that flare-ups are something that you could have 1 or 2 and suddenly 10 and suddenly 100, like the old Breck commercials, right? So, I mean, how do you deal with that? That to me is where the issue is. You tamp down those hot spots, and then once the hot spots go away, then you go back to normal. But at the same time, you're going to have it per school, and I don't think it's a bad idea at all. But how do we go about that endemically to just realize that's now the new process? So anyway, I do appreciate the effort, though, but I also want to reflect what the chairperson is saying, is that not understanding the teacher side of it and the staff, not having that in the plan may create some confusion as well. Because I do remember that was part of the problem when we had to shut down. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Trustee Kloppenstein, I agree with your points there, and I will tell you that one of the reasons that those categories are so wide is to avoid just on the flip of a dime having to change. We would have a lot of notification if a school started I could see a school being at 1.5% and us notifying families, hey, we're getting close, participate in safe activities, things like that ahead of time. You're not in a normal school, and that's why we have the 250. In a smaller school, that could happen really quickly. That's why we have the rolling average. But that's why we tried to make those categories a little bit wider, so it wasn't today we're in yellow, tomorrow we're in red, today we're in green. It would take a substantial community outbreak to move us around from one category to the next. But I agree with your statement there.
Trustee Kofelt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To kind of piggyback on what Trustee Klopfenstein said is I think, and I agree with your points, I think this is the measured approach to wrapping the community's head around that this is really going to be with us for the rest of our lives. And so I think it's important as we move to these phases and this becomes a part of life that we may reach a point where we remove the percentages. But I think it's a great tool right now, and I appreciate the staff putting the percentages that are broad enough that we're not going to be flipping a switch on a dime on Friday and then it changes on Monday. These are broad enough. I can see us progressing out of this. From the historical standpoint, when the previous, and I wasn't on the board at the time, but when we had these previous red, yellow, and red, green, yellow, and red, we didn't know what we know today. We didn't have some of the precautions in place that we have today with vaccines. We didn't know what the impact was going to be to children at that time. We know now that this is not a significant impact to our children. So there's some things that we know today. So that's why I'm supportive of this. I think it's a great measured step that provides some really clear-cut stuff for staff and thing to work off of. And we may find, before the end of this year that we can move even beyond the percentages. It's not something that can't be adjusted. That's my thoughts. Thank you.
Trustee Buffy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question for Dr. Bubb. In the red where it says that close contacts are quarantined regardless of mask status, can you explain the rationale for that?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Trustee Buffy, I think that really gets back to what we didn't want to get into is a system of if you don't have a mask on, you're quarantined. If you have a mask on, you're not quarantined. We recognize that was not successful in our schools, meeting with our administrators, meeting with our school nurses, meeting with some of our teachers. That became really problematic as far as figuring out who had a mask on, who didn't have a mask on. So if we get to that level, it really just becomes we have to look at quarantining. I mean, because that would be a significant spread. I think the other thing that I would just ask everybody to think through as we look at plans across districts and things like that, there's a lot of districts that have gone away from a plan at all. This gives us, and that's why I call it catastrophic measurements, so we can look at what does it look like. So there's some plan out there of, yes, these are wide categories. Yes, these are there would be extensive spreads in the schools. But when we, getting us from where we were, and I think to go back on some of the comments, to get us from where we are today to where we want to go, and being able to live long-term and have a sustainable plan for long-term purposes, that was kind of the rationale behind this.
Trustee Buffy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, and I understand that, and I agree, I appreciate that. I just worry that this is more restrictive than what we're doing now, because in red, masks are required. So we would be sending students home, not allowing them to stay in class in a mask required environment. And like I said, that's more restrictive than we are today.
Madam Chair, Trustee Buffy, you're right. We're not at 4% today. I mean, that would be my biggest piece. I mean, 4% would be substantial spread within a school. We would have to do everything we possibly could, again, to limit spread. And we're welcome to amend that if we would like to.
So Trustee Kofel, I'm gonna smile at you.
I can see it.
Because I think where my head's at is actually less restrictive than where yours is at right now. So I want to throw out where my head's at. So I've been thinking about this. Like, there's 3 components to this in my mind: parent choice, operational flexibility, and parent informed. So by parent choice, in my mind, now every parent in our district has the exact same choices for how to manage the safety around COVID for their own family. Granted, we have to get through the inoculation period, but the choice is there today. Operational flexibility means, if Dr. Bubb wants to apply this standard without the board adopting it, he absolutely could. But if something happens where the standard isn't necessarily working for what happens operationally, then giving that operational flexibility is there today and we maintain it. And then the parent-informed piece, I think, is really important around parents knowing that their child or children have been exposed for a couple of reasons. Maybe they're not worried about the safety of their family, but they have other family members who they wouldn't go see if their child's been exposed. They might take that break. So in my mind, parent choice, operational flexibility, and parent informed, where I would go if I were thinking through this is to go to a mask optional environment at a set date and maintain our current positive cases notification and maintain our removal of contact tracing. So that's where I would sit today, rather than go with this recommendation, which I actually think what I'm sitting at is more flexible than what we've got in front of us. Yeah, Trustee Kofel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, don't get me wrong. I would be supportive of this all goes away. We go to life as it was before. Masks are optional, and just like our central district, when you have a high positivity rate in the community, they don't even do contact tracing anymore. So I'd be more than happy to move that direction. So I was just looking at something that I thought, Dr. Bubb and his team brought forward, and so I would support it. But I would, if I felt there was a support, I'd be happy to eliminate all of this. That would be, and we go to mask optional, no contact tracing, keep your kids home if they're sick, much like what's happening in the community right now.
Madam Chair.
Trustee Kloppenstein.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yeah, I would actually agree. I think actually going back to what again, the game changer for me is that vaccines are available for kids going down to 5 years old. I just want to make sure that parents have enough time to make sure they can get those vaccines into arms if that's what their choice is. But otherwise, yeah, I think going back to having what we had before, this structure, again, I appreciate the work, but it does kind of create some problems we had from before. But at the same time, having vaccines available does make a huge difference for me.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Oh,
I just wanted to respond, Madam Chair, really quick. This does operationally make things more challenging. So, to your point, and I think the points I heard, I would love to go there. I think being able to go to a mask optional environment in which we don't quarantine kids and we tell kids that they need to stay home if they're sick, I think is a much easier operational standpoint.
Trustee Ozuna.
Related to the vaccine, is there anybody that can talk to how much protection our kids have after 1 shot versus 2 plus the inoculation period?
Director Duke, are you still on with us?
I am, and I'm not sure what the answer is to that. I do know that right now, statewide, which is what the data that's been published, there's been 7,692 doses administered, which is about 4% of the 5 to 11-year-old population. And if you were looking at making sure they had the opportunity to get the maximum benefit, it's 2 doses, 3 weeks apart plus 2 weeks. So obviously kids are going to continue to get the vaccine, but if you looked at the ones that were already vaccinated and the timing on that, it would be about the time West Ada goes on winter break that they would have full protection.
Thank you, Mr. Duke. Let's talk through that a little bit. What are your guys' thoughts on a date? What are you thinking there?
Madam Chair, one thing I'd like to know, okay, based on when the shots became available then, what would be the, if everybody chose to get the 2 shots and then the 2 weeks after, what is that farthest date out? What is that?
Director Duke, what was the first day vaccines became available for 5 through 11 in the state of Idaho?
You know, I don't have that exact date, so I'm not sure. I just looking at the data, thinking that so far there's been, you know, basically fewer than 8,000 doses administered, so that'd be fewer than 8,000 kids total vaccinated. There was some question about when a child could get vaccinated, where they could get vaccinated. So I guess I would look at, given at least a few week period of time, including where we're at right now, as far as making sure parents had the opportunity to get their kids into their primary care providers to get it, versus picking the start date day 1 and 3 weeks plus 2 weeks and calling that the timeline for full vaccination. That'd be my recommendation.
We got it. Actually, so it looks like, thank you. Well, I was actually looking up. What's the source of that data?
Idaho State, St. Luke's.
Okay. There you go, Rusty. I have November 6th, but yeah, we have November 6th as the date that Albertsons made it first available. Yeah. So we can look both. Thank you, Mr. Duke.
Madam Chair?
Go ahead,
Oh.
Trustee Capel.
Yeah, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in adults, after the first shot, you were looking at, and I know it depended upon Pfizer versus Moderna, but you were looking at, you know, upwards of a 60% protection following 1 shot. I think I could be wrong on that number, but it was pretty close to that. So with kids, everything I've read, their immune systems are probably going to have even a greater response to this if they choose to get it. So that number, I would imagine, would not be any less. Just talking out loud. So November 3rd, what's an adequate time if we were looking at this to go completely, this is me talking, I'm not saying there's support for it, to go completely away from this, what's an adequate time for a first shot if it was available as of November 3rd? I mean, after Thanksgiving, you're looking at, what is that, 3 weeks that it's been out?
So November 3rd, the first day, the 21 days would be November 24th, next week, and then your 2-week inoculation period would be December 8th.
That's for 2 shots.
That's for 2 shots.
Yeah, I was talking about what would be an adequate time with 1 shot.
Oh, I don't know. That's an epidemiology question.
I mean, no, I'm saying if the time to get it, not the benefit. I'm saying the time to get it, if it was available on the 3rd, I don't know, maybe Mr. Duke can speak to this, how readily available it is for those families wanting to get it. If at the end of November, if they wanted to get it, is the availability of the vaccine there that anybody that wanted it should have been able to get it?
Yeah, the answer to that is definitely by the end of November, given the time frame when it became authorized and when it was brought online here in Idaho. And you guys saw a couple different dates in early November. I think that by the end of November, anyone who wanted to get their child vaccinated would have been able to have the opportunity to get at least one dose.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Duke, do you recall what the efficacy was? I threw out a big word there. I hope it was properly used. What it was for adults after the first shot? Was I correct in my 60% efficacy after a first shot, or close to that?
Correct. That was so Moderna had a higher efficacy rate. I seem to recall it was closer to 80%, and the Pfizer vaccine, which is what being used for the 5 to 11-year-olds, was somewhere, it seemed like it was a little above 50% is what I recall.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my thought on this is we have a virus that I think has been shown to not really impact our youth, definitely not near to the magnitude of the adult population. That's with nothing. Now we're talking about after a first shot, 50, 60% efficacy for those that want to get it in a population that's not impacted significantly by it anyways. I would be supportive of moving forward with a position of masks are optional, no contact tracing, at a date that the board determines is appropriate for everybody to have gotten one shot, if they want it. I'm not saying I'm forcing that or pushing it. I'm just saying if a family wanted it.
Thoughts from the board? Trustee Kloppenstein.
Chairman Johnson, thank you very much. I'd actually be quite curious to see what the Trustee Ozuna and yourself would feel, being that you'll be here in January. So,
Trustee Ozuna.
I do agree with Trustee Kloppenstein. I think that or Trustee Klopfeld, I think that the data for kids is good, and so one shot offers a significant additional protection for them, and I would be comfortable not waiting for both doses. Although I still find benefit in notification of exposures within a classroom setting, or positive cases within a classroom setting, I guess is what I'm saying, what we're doing today. I think there's advantages for families with that.
I'm living it, and I'm fine with it. So as a parent with kids who've got a first shot, I'm comfortable with it. So I don't know that everybody's going to feel the same way I do, but you know, the other choice is to wear the mask for through the inoculation period and the second shot too, and I think that's another safety protocol. That choice is available as well. So I'm comfortable with that date as well.
Madam Chair.
Oh, sorry.
So what's our date that we return from the Thanksgiving break?
That's a better question for Dr. Bubb.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, Trustee Kofelt, November 29th.
There you go.
Okay. And Dr. Bubb, I'm sorry, follow up. Dr. Bubb, let's say we moved to a mask optional at, you know, the return from Thanksgiving break. How difficult would it be to, if the school was notified that a child did have COVID, just to send an email to those parents? Because I don't see any harm in that for sure.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Trustee Kofelt, that's our current procedures. We could absolutely do that. That's not a problem.
And I would echo what Trustee Ozuna said. I think parents being informed is a really, really critical thing in all walks, not just in COVID notification. So I support that.
Yeah, I do too.
All right. More discussion? All right. Well, that was fun. We'll move on to action items. Oh, Mr. Duke, I think we're good, and we appreciate your time and your availability to answer some questions for the board as needed. So.
Yeah, thank you for the invite.
All right, thank you. We're going to hang up.
Take care.
You too. All right, actually, thank you to our already seasoned clerk for reminding me what I missed on the agenda. I forgot to ask if there were any additions to the agenda or changes at the very beginning of the meeting, so I'm going to make that ask right now to Clerk Shephers.
Madam Chair, no, they're not.
Thank you. All right, we'll go into the action item portion of the agenda. And I think it'd probably be helpful for the board if you pull back out these resolutions that are in front of you. And what I'm going to make the suggestion for how we go through this is I'll just say up in front of the board is resolution number 1, and then for folks who want to make a motion, we'll vote, and we'll go through all, I guess there's 8, even though there's 9 numbers. We'll go through all of them, and then that'll count for this action portion of the agenda. Does anybody have any concern with following that process? Trustee Kloppenstein.
I was just, instead of saying, thank you, Madam Chair, instead of saying yes or no, is it possible we support or don't support? Would that be the resolution?
So from a motion, now there's another option, and that's just a motion if somebody wants to make the attempt to just adopt the support for the whole package in one motion. That's another option. How we word the motion, though, is for support for the resolution, support or do not support. So you're right. Thank you. So with that, the floor is open for motions. Trustee Kloppenstein.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move that we support items 1 through 3 and 4 through 9 that have been presented.
Thank you. For clarification, would you do like 5 through 9 or 4 through 9? Thank you. Want to make sure our clerk got that motion. Okay. Is there a second?
Madam Chair, I'll second it.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that the board support ISBA resolutions 1 through 3 and 5 through 9. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. Ooh, that was fun. All right. Next action item up on the agenda is COVID-19 protocols, the mask requirement triggers. And with that, the floor is open for motions. Trustee Kofelt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we transition to a mask optional environment for students and staff in all district facilities while maintaining our current positive case notification procedures beginning November 29th.
2021.
2021.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Madam Chair, I'll second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that the board adopt a motion that we transition to mask optional environment for students and staff in all district facilities while maintaining current positive case notification procedures starting on November 29th, 2021. Is there any discussion? Well, I just want to say thank you, because this is not a fun process for anybody to go through, and we appreciate our nurses giving lots of really good feedback. Know that you had shared a lot of variability in kind of how people saw this from different school settings, so I think we got a lot of good information to be able to make a good decision off of. So any other discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Oh, you said aye. Okay, I couldn't. That's actually what I was looking for. Okay, chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. All right. Next item up on the agenda is the consent agenda. And we will entertain some motions, or a motion. You're not done yet. He just likes to adjourn.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. I would move that we approve the consent agenda as presented by staff.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Madam Chair, I'll second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that the board adopt the consent agenda as presented. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. And with that, we'll move to a break and to a work session on board protocols. So thank you. Thank you. Board's back. We had some technical difficulties with the online from the work session, so we're going to go ahead and postpone that and move into future agenda items. With that, I'd open it up for any future agenda items from the board. Trustee Kloppenstein.
I would assume we're going to be having, I mean, this would be the last meeting we had with the current clerk, the temporary clerk, so I'm assuming we'll have a clerk assignment. Just curious if maybe administration might want to talk about that.
Oh, okay. At the next board meeting or now?
Well, it would have to be. I'm assuming it would have to be at the next board meeting because our, what we voted on was for the 15th.
Okay.
So.
Okay, okay, great. Thank you. Any other future agenda items? All right, great. We'll move into item number 10. Trustee Kloppenstein.
I move that we adjourn.
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded that the board adjourn. This is a non-debatable motion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. We're adjourned.